Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday edition. Our special guest today, Allegheny County Executive Rich Fitzgerald and Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto. 3 weeks now since the Tree of Life massacre. Rich Fitzgerald, you live right in that neighborhood, Mayor Peduto. I know you're nearby. Yeah. How would you describe life in your neighborhood now that 3 weeks have passed?
I think people in the immediate aftermath, I would say literally in shock. I mean, as I saw my neighbors in the next couple of days, just walking up and down the street, just really couldn't believe. There's a healing process that's quite frankly, very slow. You know, when you go to events and you go to meetings or whatever it might be in the neighborhood, there's still a lot of pain and there's still a lot of healing that goes on. Having said that, I think there's also this need for people to come together. So when these services or community gatherings occur, there's much bigger crowds right now because people just have a need to be together. And I think what the world has seen and the nation has seen is what a special place Squirrel Hill is. It always has been, not just through this, but it's a place where different religions, different ethnic groups, different folks really do come together and live together and coexist and are friends and are part of each other.
Mayor Peduto, you talked about at the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial the night after the shooting, you talked about eradicating any type of hate from the city.
Yeah.
This hate, this evil came from outside the city.
Yeah.
Is there really any type of what are you talking about?
Came from a conversation I had with the mayor of Annapolis, where a similar hate crime was committed against people who were journalists. And he had
Capital Gazette newspaper.
Yeah, he had been talking to St. John's University and officials there about how far we have gotten away from civil discourse. The conversation in this country today has allowed for hate speech to be part of the norm. And the question is, how do you roll it back? And nobody really is addressing that question. So when we talk about eradicating hate, it's not simply eradicating when somebody walks into a place of worship with a gun. It's what leads somebody to that process, and what is the process that you work towards in order for people to say, hey, that's inappropriate. 5 years ago, you said that in hushed tones with a small group. You're not a part of the discussion of political and policy discourse when you bring those set of irrational ideas to the table. So what we want to do is work within the cities around the country that have experienced firsthand hate crimes. Parkland, Annapolis, Orlando, Pittsburgh, San Bernardino, other cities, and start to put together a way to try to get this country back to normal.
You took some criticism for not welcoming the president when he was here. Neither of you welcomed the president. The Rabbi Meyer of Tree of Life, said, of course he's welcome. He's our president. He's always welcome here. If you're talking about a dialogue, if you're talking about trying to get past some of these divisions, wouldn't it have been the right thing to welcome the President of the United States coming to Pittsburgh to mourn and to grieve?
Well, I'll speak for myself. I'll let Rich speak for himself. There were 9 elected officials who were invited by the White House to be there with the President, 4 of whom were Republicans, 5 of whom were Democrats, and only 1 felt that it was appropriate to be there at that time. It wasn't that we told the President not to come. We simply said, this is not the appropriate time. We're following the rules of conservative Judaism. We're burying the dead at the very shortest time period. We are starting the funerals on that same day. I sat Shiva with the Rosenthals, and then I went down to the Pens game where we had a special honor for 2 of our officers. And if you'd ask me, where should I be as the mayor? Standing with the president at a ceremony, or being with the family of the victims and with our officers who were injured? Every single time I would choose that.
That's a good argument, but isn't it undercut somewhat by the rabbi saying, of course the president can come and I would welcome him? I mean, if you're talking about religious concerns, protocol, things like that, the rabbi welcomed it. Are you disappointed that the rabbi welcomed the president?
No, that's the rabbi's decision, and Rabbi Myers is a very good man and somebody who has helped to hold a community together during a very difficult time. That's his option. My option was to, and we made it very clear, The first thing we take care of is the families. The second part are those that are wounded, and the third was the Jewish community. And when we set those priorities, they were our priorities. Whether it was a Democratic president or a Republican president, my priority was to the families.
And we also did say, yes, please come back in a few days. Basically, it wasn't very, like, don't not come. We wanted to have that conversation. It was also described to me as a rally type of event, and I didn't want to have a very public event. Now, having said that, when the president came here, I thought what he did was fine. I thought it was going into the synagogue, putting the stones on the memorials, going to the hospitals. I thought that was very the way it should have been done. That was not the way it was described to us that we would be there. And as the mayor said, the leaders of both parties in Washington were invited and decided not to come, or the congressman or the senator from this area decided not to come too. And then the one thing I think that I wasn't happy about was when he came here, he made it political and asked people to vote for Keith Rothfuss. Bill and I were with a lot of political people that were up for election that were here. We would never say during the rally at Soldiers and Sailors or during some of these other things that occurred, vote for whoever's up for office.
I'm sorry, when did the president say that?
He tweeted that out while he was here.
While he was here?
Yeah.
Okay. Would your position on this be any different if this were President Obama or President Hillary Clinton?
I'm pretty much convinced, having worked with the Obama administration very closely, that the president would have heeded the advice of local officials and would have waited until the next week to make that visit, giving us the opportunity to put our police not at every intersection closing traffic down, but at the funerals, at the synagogues, at the schools, and where they were needed that week.
And Bill's exactly right. They would have called to get our input as to what to do. Much like Governor Wolf did. Governor Wolf would always call us, what should I do? What should I? And we said, certainly come, but we don't want you to be. And the governor did. He was way in the back. You never even knew he was here half the time. It was just a bot support. Again, it was described a little bit differently, but I thought when he did come, that I thought it was appropriate the way that the visit occurred. And by the way, the other thing we did, there were protesters on the other side. And we were asking the protesters, please don't come, please don't. This is not about a political event, whether you're for or against the president. And there were marches through the neighborhood, and that wasn't what this was about. This was really about the families, and as they're grieving, and as they are burying their loved one.
Yeah, just getting back to our community here, is there anything that you learned about Pittsburgh, about Squirrel Hill, about our community here and our people out of this ordeal that you just didn't realize beforehand? Or
I think it, at least on a personal level, reassured me why I love the city. We went through one of the 20 worst mass murders in American history. We went through the worst massacre of Jewish Americans in American history. And even when I say those words, it's hard to really comprehend them, but we really leaned on each other. When we were sitting out there in the rain on Saturday morning, well, this was still going down and the building was not secure yet. And I look across the street and I see Wazi Muhammad from the Islamic Center and the leadership, all the executive board of the Islamic Center there praying while the event's happening. On a global basis, find me cities where that can happen. And that wasn't just built on that moment. That was the culmination of interfaith dialogue that occurs continuously. Throughout this whole dark time, there have been these rays of light that have been able to shine through. A woman and her son driving through Squirrel Hill with their front seat filled with vases with flowers in it, just handing flowers to people who are on the street. Time after time after time, just goodness coming through this horrible evil. And, you know, maybe it takes something that horrendous to be able to really prove what it is, but this city showed it.
And I can tell you, for my wife and I, we've lived here 35 years. That's where we raised our kids. Not that I always liked the fact that we lived in the neighborhood. It just reaffirmed in a higher level that this was a great place to live and a great place to raise our family. And I think the world got to see, the nation got to see that, and the world got to see that. Unfortunately, it took this type of a tragedy to shine that light. But as the mayor said, through that darkness, I think there's light that have people coming together, people reaffirming their love for each other, again, across, places that maybe in other places, other cities, other states, there's division. I think we have a unification of love over hate that I really think is something we can be very, very, very proud of.
One of the heroes from that awful Saturday morning was Pittsburgh police officer Tim Mattson, who last we knew was still in the hospital. Do you have an update on how he's doing?
He's doing much better. He's still going to be in the hospital for a while as he just had pins removed. I think he still has a pin in his leg, but Officer Mattson's a big guy. He's going to be able to go through his recovery and recuperation in physical therapy as he does every other part of his job, and I have full faith that he's going to be back on the streets. He's still going to need some more time in the hospital, as is Rabbi Danny Lager, but for the two of them that we weren't sure what the prognosis would be, the team at Presby delivered a miracle for both of them, and they're both going to be able to be with their loved ones and live a full life, and God wanted them to stay for a reason, and I told them both that, and I'm sure that they'll figure out what that reason is.
We'll leave it on that note. Mayor Bill Peduto, Executive Rich Fitzgerald, thanks so much. Back with some final thoughts in just a moment.